So, in the Quran, it never says that you have to go out and kill all the unbelievers. It says in certain specific situations, yes, you kill the unbelievers, namely if they fight against you, if they resist your attempt at conquest. And so that happens with many conquerors, like Genghis Khan, essentially subdued populations everywhere and then employed them. And only when they resisted, he would kill them mercilessly, like the destruction of Khwarezm or of Baghdad by his grandson Hulagu, 1 million people killed. You see, that's premeditated murder, but only in very specific circumstances at the height of a military conflict. Whereas you rarely see a Muslim genocide in peacetime. Like, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to kill the unbelievers. You see, mostly then they prefer to subdue the unbelievers, yes, so to collect money from them, to humiliate them and so on, but, otherwise leave them in relative peace. So there are situations of genocide, like for instance, if you were caught by Muslims in Punjab in 1947, they didn't ask questions, they killed every unbeliever they could lay their hands on. Or in East Bengal in 1971. You see, there locally, there were 2-3 million people killed. You see, that really was genocide. They just killed whoever they could get. And mostly that is not the case. So it is not Islam as such that has a plan for genocide against unbelievers as such. You see, these genocidal massacres take place in specific military circumstances. Sometimes also in peacetime, like Aurangzeb, for example, he had a stable, comfortable empire. The Mughals, since Akbar, later in his career, had a relatively good compromise. It was a Muslim empire, but Hindus were not too seriously oppressed. They could rebuild their temples, for instance. And Aurangzeb simply got religion at some point and said, well, what is this? You see, this compromise, that was not intended by Muhammad. Come on, let's persecute the unbelievers. So there, you see, this he did in peacetime. It was not genocide. There was, of course, a lot of killing involved. Mainly, it was an action against the persistence of unbelief, particularly of idolatry. So all the idol temples, again, were destroyed. So that was an initiative in peacetime. And so, but that's fairly rare in Muslim history. So you get massacres, you get killings. To call them genocide is true in some cases, but not as the overall Islamic plan. So what happened over the centuries in India is much larger than the Holocaust. Of course, there is far more space and far more time. But at the same time, it was also less serious than the Holocaust. The Holocaust is the genocide par excellence because the victims had no choice. Like, for instance, I know of many cases of Jews trying to convert to Christianity and then say, oh, no, I'm not a Jew. And that didn't help because the Nazis said, well, if you're born a Jew, you're a Jew. So, whereas Hindus always had an escape. So sometimes at the height of a crisis, no questions were asked. But in general, they could always convert. And so, of course, that's a terrible choice to make. In order to survive, I'm going to convert. Or let's say you're a relatively poor person, you're in a trial with your neighbor over, you see whether the mangoes falling from his tree into your garden belong to you or to him, or some trifle. It goes to court, and then in court you notice, oh, you see, the one of us who first converts to Islam is definitely going to win the trial. So then you say, my situation is difficult. Am I going to pay that price? Am I going to convert to Islam? So quite a few people did. So many of the Muslims of today are descendants of those Hindus who, under pressure, not exactly with the knife on the throat, but under pressure, converted. And so you see, this conversion was, of course, not a free option, but at the same time, it was a really existing option. So you didn't have to die. Like the famous case of Guru Tegh Bahadur. He had been arrested for agreeing to be called king or something that implied sovereignty, which Aurangzeb saw as a challenge to the Mughal authority. So he was sought out, he absconded, he tried to hide. I mean, there is a myth that he himself went to the Mughal court to challenge Aurangzeb, oh, you have to let the Kashmiri Pandits free from forced conversion. This is all myth. But you see, anyway, he was found out, he was taken to the Mughal court, he was sentenced, and then Aurangzeb said, wait a minute, okay, we're going to behead you unless, and it's, much to our liking if you do it because you're a big religious leader, you're going to have a lot of influence, unless you convert to Islam. And so there are religious leaders who have done this. Like, for instance, there was a 17th century Jewish leader, Shabbatai Tzvi, who was in a similar situation in the Ottoman court in Istanbul. And so he was forced to convert, and he accepted conversion, which created a big crisis of conscience among all his followers.